I can still smell that summer of '73, the kind of heat that dries a man's sweat before it reaches his collar. The wind came low and mean across the Wyoming plain, carrying grit sharp enough to scratch your teeth. That day, I was riding the south range of Dust Spurs, checking fences and feeling the storm brewing out west. You learn to listen to the sky in these parts. It talks before it strikes. The clouds were building, black as a burned barn, and the air had that weight to it, like the world was holding its breath. My horse, Boone, was restless, tossing his head, ears twitching to thunder that hadn't yet spoken. I figured I had about an hour before the storm hit proper, enough time to ride the ridge and make sure no cattle had broken through. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a patch of canvas snagged on the sagebrush. Nothing more than a ghost against the dirt, but as I rode closer, I made out the shape of a tent, half collapsed, and smoke from a dying fire curling up thin as regret. Then I heard it, the cry of a child, soft but sharp enough to slice through the wind. My gut twisted. Out here, a cry like that doesn't belong. It means trouble, or worse. I nudged Boone forward and called out, "Hello, the camp." My voice got carried off by the wind. No answer came back. Just the flap of that tent and the low whimpering from inside. I dismounted slow, one hand near my belt, not for fighting, just habit. Folks in the frontier, we learned that strangers can mean salvation or sin, sometimes both. I lifted the flap. Inside, crouched low, was a woman and 3 children. She was holding a revolver steady as a preacher's hand aimed square at my chest. The barrel didn't tremble. Her face was shadowed by the light, but her eyes caught mine. Gray-blue and fierce, the kind that could stop a man mid-word. "Stay where you are," she said, voice rough from wind and weariness. "I will, ma'am," I answered, keeping my tone soft. "Name's Rowan Tate. I ride for Dusty Spur, just a few miles yonder. Storm's coming fast. You and your young uns can't stay out here." She didn't lower the gun. "We'll manage. Not against what's coming. That sky's meaner than any outlaw." The youngest child whimpered, pulling at her sleeve. I saw then how pale they all were. Thin faces, lips cracked, the kind of hunger that settles deep in the bones. Her clothes were torn, her hair wine-whipped, but she stood like a woman who carried her world alone and didn't plan to let it fall apart tonight. "Please, I said. "I ain't here to take nothing. I'm offering a roof. There's a cabin near the east pasture, empty but sound. You stay there till the storm passes." She hesitated, eyes narrowing like she was reading my soul for fine print. I couldn't blame her. Out here, a woman alone learns quick that charity often comes with a price. "What do you want in return?" she asked. "Nothing that costs you more than you can give," I said. "Just to keep you safe till morning. You got my word." Her gaze flicked to the sky, then back to me. The thunder cracked. Closer now. She lowered the gun a few inches, but didn't set it down. "My name's Clara," she said, "and these are my children." The tent shuddered in the wind. One of the poles gave way with a snap, the canvas slapping like a wounded bird. She turned, eyes wide, and in that moment, the choice was made for her. I reached out my hand, and after a heartbeat, she took it. We moved quick. I threw her few belongings into my saddlebag. Blankets, a pot, the worn revolver she finally unloaded and tucked away. I lifted the smallest child up to her arm, helped the older 2 onto Boone's back behind me. The wind was howling by then, full of dust and the smell of rain. Clara climbed up last, sitting behind the children, clutching them tight. I took the reins and turned Boone toward the ridge. The first drops fell like bullets, cold and hard. The prairie disappeared in gray sheets. Boone fought the wind, head down, legs sure. I kept my hat low and my eyes on the ridgeline. Clara didn't speak. I felt her grip tighten every time thunder cracked, her breath catching like she was afraid to breathe too loud, as if the storm could hear her. Halfway there, lightning struck close, lighting up the plains in white fire. The boy cried out, the horse stumbled, and I felt Clara's hand clutch my coat. I turned slightly, yelling over the roar, "Hold on, we're almost there." When we finally reached the cabin, the sky had split wide open. I swung down and pulled the children inside first. The place smelled of cedar and dust, but the roof was strong, walls thick. I lit a lantern, the flame flickering gold against the dark. Clara stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. For a moment she looked lost, like she'd stepped into someone else's dream. "Get by the fire," I said. "There's wood in the bin." She didn't move right away. The children huddled near the hearth, watching her. Finally, she crossed the threshold, as if stepping over an invisible line between fear and trust. The storm hit full outside, rattling the shutters, but in here the light grew steady. I stoked the flames, the warmth pushing back the chill. The smell of smoke and rain filled the room. I took off my coat, hung it by the door, and turned to her. "You're safe now, ma'am. Tonight, you'll sleep under a roof." For the first time, she let out a long breath, something like a sigh, but softer. The revolver still hung at her side, but her hand had loosened. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. I thought of my mother then, of the day she died in a storm, not unlike this one, and the stranger who'd stopped his wagon long enough to give her shelter she didn't live to reach. I swallowed the ache in my throat. "Because someone once tried to do the same for my family," I said, "and I reckon I owe the world one act of kindness, yet unpaid." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, silent. I turned back to the fire, pretending to adjust the logs, but really just giving her the space to breathe. Outside, the thunder rolled away, slow and distant. Inside, the children had drifted to sleep one by one. Clara sat near the hearth, her eyes half closed, watching the flames like they were something sacred that night. I didn't sleep much. I sat by the window, listening to the rain ease off, and thought about how small one act can seem and how it can change everything. The storm passed before dawn, but something in me knew the weather wasn't the only thing that had shifted. Dawn came shy, a pale ribbon along the horizon, and the air had that washed smell storms leave behind. The cabin walls clicked as they cooled. I had drifted in and out till the light turned from slate to butter. The children woke the way sparrows do. A rustle, a whisper, a small cough, then quiet again. Clara rose last. She stood by the window, hands to the sill, as if testing whether the world would hold. There's a first sound in any day that you remember if the day turns out different. For me, it was the crackle of kindling when I coaxed the fire back to life. For her, I think, it was the sigh her youngest made when the warmth touched her feet. I had a sack of dry goods tucked under the bunk for riders who found themselves out late. Cornmeal, a bit of salt, coffee, a cured slab of bacon wrapped in brown paper. I set it on the table without ceremony. Charity looks better in plain wrapping. "I'll cook," Clara said. She did not ask. She took the skillet like it was proof she still owned something in this world, even if it was only the next 15 minutes. I stepped back, glad for it. The smell of bacon rose easy, coffee followed, and the cabin learned a new language. The boy, Samuel, I would learn, sat straight as a fence post and watched every move his mother made, like he was memorizing comfort. The oldest girl moved quiet and sure, wiping the table with the sleeve of her dress, setting tin cups without being told. The little one, Grace, tucked her chin on the bench and looked at the fire as if it were a picture book. We ate without words, because hunger speaks first. When the plates were empty, Clara folded her hands and looked at me in that steady way of hers. The revolver lay on the shelf behind her. She had cleaned it while the bacon sputtered. It was not a threat so much as an announcement. I am not only the storm's victim, I am also my children's guard. "You said the cabin was empty," she began. "How long can we stay?" "As long as you need shelter and can stand the work that comes with it," I said. "I ride foreman for Dust Spurs. The ranch keeps 3 bunkhouses, a line shack, and this cabin for hands and weather. I figure the sky chose you for it last night. I won't argue with the sky. There's mending, and mending plenty. I can ask the boss if you want the long answer, but he trusts my judgment." "What kind of work?" she asked. "Work that keeps dignity intact," I said. "Cookhouse needs hands most seasons, mending bedrolls, patching canvas. A garden would take if we bring water from the creek. It won't be charity. It'll be trade." Her chin lifted a fraction. That small movement told me the talk had found the right path. Pride is not something to stamp out in a person like Clara. It is the axle their wagon turns on. Touch it wrong, and the wheel breaks. "I can stitch," she said. "I can wash and keep books if the books are simple. I can hold a child on each hip and not spill the stew." "That is a full day's work where I come from," I said, "and more useful than a fine hat." She almost smiled. It came and went like a shy animal. "We owe you for last night," she said, "and you'll say what it is. I want the owing to be clear." "You owe me breakfast," I said, and let the joke sit there till the tension softened. Then I added, "And if you will, your patience with a man who talks to horses as if they were deacons. Boone takes offense if you ignore him." The little one giggled at that, the sound quick and bright. I felt the knot in my shoulders loosen. I stepped outside with a coffee cup and surveyed the lay. The storm had cleaned the sky so sharp it almost hurt to look at. The cottonwoods by the creek wore a new coat of silver. Hoofprints along the path told me 2 strays had nosed close to the door in the night, curious at the lantern's glow. I would need to send a rider to check the south fence line. Dusty Spur stretched wider than a man's sigh. Hills, breaks in the river making a slow S like the brand carved in our gate. The main house sat 3 miles west, whitewashed wood, a pair of low barns, corrals black with years of hooves. I carried the picture of it in my mind, the way you carry a compass. When I came back in, Clara had folded the blankets with the care some folks reserve for letters. She looked rested in that way only mothers understand. Not rested at all, but permitted to lay down the weight for one night. I told her my plan for the day. I would ride to the main house, speak to Mr. Caldwell, bring back supplies, fetch a doctor if she wanted one to look at the children. She listened without interrupting, then said she would appreciate a few things if the ranch could spare them. Need outweighed pride now, and asking became its own act of strength. Paper and a pencil, she said first. For the girl, she likes her letters. A needle of good steel for mending, if there is one. Soap, and shoes that do not let water in. I can bring all that, I said, and while I am gone, the cabin is yours. You bolt the door. You open it only when you hear me say your name. She weighed that, then nodded. What about payment? We will tally at the cookhouse when the work starts, I said. For now, count the day as owed to the weather. I saddled Boone's while the children stood in the doorway like 3 small sentries. Claire kept to the shadow, but I felt her eyes on me. When I mounted, she spoke for the first time in that tone a person uses when they gamble their last coin. You said last night a man once tried to do right by your family, she said. Did he succeed? No, I answered plain, but I learned from the trying. Sometimes that is what we get. I tipped my hat, and Boone went to a slow trot down the trail. The road to the main house gave me time to sift my thoughts. I had not planned on adding 4 souls to the cabin's quiet. I had planned to mend fence, check water, ride in at dusk, swallow stew, sleep, and rise before the dew dried. Life on a ranch moves in practical circles. Men like me fit our hurts into the spaces between work and dust. It is tidy, and it keeps you from thinking yourself into a hole. But the sight of that tent in the wind had lifted the old boards inside me. Behind them lay rooms I had not aired in years. I remembered my mother's hands, flour dust in the creases, the way she tied her hair before the morning rush at the bakery. The day the epidemic took her, the church bell tolled and never once asked who could afford the sound. A teamster, name unknown to me still, let me ride his wagon part way to the doctor with a blanket over her. He gave me half a loaf he could not spare. He could not save her, but he did not let me carry that hour alone. A man heavy with grief is a mule that will lie down on the trail unless someone whistles him up. That teamster whistled. When I reached the main house, the yard was already awake. 2 boys were throwing hay. A girl in a blue dress led a blind cow to the shade. I tied Boone by the post and went up the steps 2 at a time. Caldwell met me at the door, suspenders hanging, hair still wet from the basin. He is a man who counts every nail because he has bought every nail himself. You're early, he said. Storm knock sense into you or knock it out. Brought strangers to the east cabin last night, I said. Widow with 3 children. Tent near tore to rags. I put them under a roof. I told her there might be work in the mending and the cookhouse. Caldwell rubbed his jaw. Any trouble coming with them? Only the sort that leaves when you feed it, I said. Hunger and fear. Then feed it, he said. We call ourselves men only if we act like men. Put her on the books when you judge it proper. Take what they need from the store. I will settle with you later. I thanked him and moved to the storeroom. I picked out a bar of lye soap, a bolt of coarse cloth, 2 pairs of small shoes and 1 wider, coffee, beans, salt, a tin of condensed milk for the little one, and the paper and pencils Claire asked for. I added a packet of needles and a thimble. My hand hovered, then took a ribbon the color of creek water and set it on the pile. It was foolish, maybe, But sometimes a new ribbon is the first brick in a woman's second life. I rode back at a canter, the sun climbing easy, the land steaming its storm sweat. When the cabin came into view, the door was barred as I had told her. I called her name and named the children, and only then did the latch lift. Clara stood there with flour on her hands, the smell of fresh fry bread in the air. She had swept the floor and opened the windows a hand's width to let the new day in. She looked at the bundle in my arms, and some of the tightness in her jaw let go. "Welcome back, Mr. Tate," she said. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jennings," I answered before I could think of a safer word. Home is a dangerous word on the frontier. It promises more than walls can keep. But in that moment, with the sky polished and the children pressing close to see the pencils and the shoes, I wanted the danger. I stepped inside and set the goods on the table. The day took its first real breath. Days on the frontier have a way of stretching wide and passing quiet, but that first week at the East Cabin stayed sharp in my mind. The storm had left puddles in every hoofprint, and the ground smelled clean, but the wind still carried the ache of the season. Clara settled into the place, like someone afraid to wake a sleeping beast. She moved slow, spoke little, watched the horizon more than the floor. It took a few days for her to believe the roof would hold. I came by each evening after riding fence or checking stock, never at the same hour, never without knocking. That cabin belonged to her and the children now, and I wasn't about to forget it. Each time, the fire was going, steady and well kept, and the children had learned to meet my eyes. Emma, the oldest, had that quick mind you only see in folks who've had to grow up before they learn to rest. She was already helping Clara keep a ledger for mending, marking down each patch sewn and shirt washed in careful letters. The boy, Samuel, had taken to following Boone like a shadow, whispering secrets to him he wouldn't tell me. Grace, the little one, found comfort in the tin cup I'd brought her. It became her world's measure, a toy, a drum, a treasure chest for acorns. Clara thanked me only once for those supplies, and she did it with her hands folded, her chin up. I told her there was no need, but she said, "A person needs to close one chapter before they can open another." I didn't have a book to argue with that kind of wisdom. She worked hard. I saw the clothes hanging neat outside the cabin, the smell of soap drifting down the slope, her hands red from lye. At night, I'd hear her singing to the children, soft, a voice with cracks in it, but still sweet. She sang songs of home, I reckon, places lost but not forgotten. When she sang, even the coyotes down by the creek seemed to listen. One afternoon, I found her in the garden behind the cabin, bent over a patch of earth she'd cleared with her own hands. "Ground's dry," I said. "You'll need water twice a day or the sun'll take it." She didn't look up. "I've tamed harder ground." That was the kind of answer that told a man when to keep his silence. I fetched a pail anyway, filled it from the creek, and left it by her side. She didn't thank me, but when I came back the next day, the beans had been planted in 2 perfect rows. Pride and gratitude live in different houses, but sometimes the porch is shared. By the end of that week, the talk around Dusty Spur had reached the bunkhouse. Cowboys always have room for stories, especially ones involving a widow, a storm, and the foreman's quiet hand. A few came by the cookhouse to ask what kind of woman she was. I told them she was the kind that didn't need gossip to make her worth knowing, and that was the end of that. Still, I caught the looks, half curious, half measuring. Men out here learn quick how loneliness breeds imagination. I made sure no one rode east without reason. The prairie has a cruel way of testing decency, and I wasn't about to let mine fail. That Friday, I brought Clara her first pay, a small pouch of coins and a note signed by Caldwell himself. She took it, weighed it in her palm, and said, "This is more than I expected. It's the rate for a hand who works honest and doesn't ask favors." She nodded. "Then I'll work twice as hard." "You already do." Her eyes softened a little, but she didn't smile. Instead, she turned the pouch over once more and said quietly, "You shouldn't be this kind." "Why is that?" "Kindness confuses people, makes them wonder what it's hiding." I leaned on the door frame, looking out to where the sky was turning gold. "Then let them wonder. I've been misunderstood most of my life, and it hasn't killed me yet." She didn't answer, just folded the pouch into her apron. For a moment, the air between us felt heavy with things neither of us knew how to say. Then Grace came running, clutching a wildflower in her hand, and the spell broke. Clara took the flower, set it in a jar, and said, "Supper will be ready soon." That night, as the lantern light flickered across her face, I saw how the hard lines had started to soften. The fear that had once lived behind her eyes was giving way to something else. Tired, yes, but steady. Healing doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It just slips in quietly and sits by the fire. I started spending more time around the cabin, not because I had to, but because the place felt like a piece of calm carved out of the storm. Emma asked if she could learn to ride, and I promised to teach her when the fences were fixed. Samuel began carrying small buckets of feed for Boone, his laughter bouncing off the cabin walls. Even Grace, who'd barely spoken at first, began to hum along with her mother. One evening, Clara came outside while I was mending a harness. She leaned against the post, watching me work. "You ever get tired of fixing what's broken?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "But if a thing still holds weight, it's worth the stitching." Her gaze lingered on the leather strap in my hands. "And what if it's not the leather that's worn, but the heart?" "Then you mend it gentle," I said, "piece by piece." She looked away then, toward the setting sun. "You talk like a preacher, Mr. Tate." "I talk like a man who's seen too much come apart," I said, "and who's tired of letting it stay that way." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that lets two people breathe in the same truth without needing to dress it up in words. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara stood by the window while I packed my tools. "You said once you owed the world a kindness unpaid," she said. "What if that debt's been settled now?" I paused, my hand still on the buckle. "No, ma'am," I said, "kindness don't settle. It circles back, like the wind. You pass it along, or it turns to dust." She turned, her face lit by the lamplight, and for the first time I saw her smile. Not small, not cautious, but real. "Then I hope the wind finds us both," she said. I tipped my hat and stepped out into the night. The stars were sharp and close, the air cool on my face. Boone snorted softly, and I ran a hand down his neck. Somewhere behind me, I heard the faint sound of Clara's voice humming again, low and even, a song of survival. I didn't know then that I'd remember that sound for the rest of my days. By midsummer, the prairie turned from green to gold, and the air shimmered like a forge. Work at Dusty Spur was steady, branding, herding, mending fences that stretched farther than patience. I spent my days under a hammer sun, and my nights by the east cabin more often than made sense. Boone knew the trail by heart, and so did I. Claire had settled in, though she'd never call it that. She kept her things packed neat, as if ready to move at a moment's notice. But the cabin had changed. Curtains from old flour sacks hung at the windows. A quilt of many hands covered the bunks. She traded with the cookhouse for flour and salt, started baking bread that made the whole place smell like something worth staying for. The children laughed now, proper belly laughter that made the walls echo. One evening, I came back late, dust thick on my coat, and found Emma outside, sitting on the fence rail, reading by the last of the light. She had that quiet focus of someone chasing words like fireflies. I asked her what she was reading, and she said, "Mama's letters." Turns out Claire had been teaching her to write, using scraps of paper and the pencils I'd brought. Letters to no one, letters to keep the tongue of hope alive. I watched her mouth the words as if she was casting spells. In a way, she was. Inside Samuel was carving something small out of driftwood. "It's Boone," he said, showing me the little horse shape, rough but recognizable. Grace was asleep on the floor, hair tangled, face smudged with the kind of dirt only play can bless. Clara looked up from the table where she was mending a shirt. "You're late," she said, but her voice held no edge. "Cattle broke the north fence," I said. "Took half a day to round them up. You should have seen Caldwell's face. Looked like someone tried to steal his Bible." She smiled a little at that. "You must be hungry. Only if you're sharing." "I wouldn't dare eat without feeding the man who keeps our roof standing," she said, half teasing, half truth. Supper was beans, cornbread, and the quiet that only comfort brings. I told her about the herd, about Caldwell's new forehand, who couldn't tell east from his elbow, and she told me about the garden sprouting in neat green rows. Somewhere between our stories, the room stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling like a home. When the children were asleep, Clara stepped outside. The night was wide, stars scattered like salt, the air still warm. She stood beside me on the porch, arms folded. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the road ahead." "Always a dangerous hobby," I said. She ignored the joke. "The children need more than a roof. Emma wants schooling. Samuel talks of horses more than sleep. I can sew and scrub, but it won't stretch forever." "You're asking if Dusty Spur can hold a future," I said. "I suppose I am." "The ranch always needs good hands," I told her. "Caldwell's wife runs the schoolhouse 2 towns over. Emma could learn there. I could see about arranging the rest." She turned her head, studying me. "Why do you keep doing this?" "Doing what?" "Carrying our burdens like they're yours." I thought about that for a long moment before I answered. Because once, someone carried mine. And because I'm tired of watching good people drown when I've got a rope in my hand. She didn't speak. The wind picked up, brushing a loose strand of her hair across her cheek. I reached to tuck it behind her ear, but stopped halfway. She did it herself, eyes never leaving mine. There was something raw in that silence, something dangerous and true. After a while, she said softly, "You ever wish the world had been kinder sooner?" "Every day," I said, but if it had been, maybe we wouldn't have met. That drew the faintest smile from her, but it carried a weight that lingered between us. Then she looked away, toward the horizon, and said, "The beans came up crooked. I planted them too close." "Crooked beans still feed you just the same," I said. "Sometimes better." That night, I stayed on the porch long after she went inside, the stars burning holes in the dark. I wasn't fool enough to think what I felt was love, not yet, but there was something growing, quiet and sure, like those crooked beans, something that didn't ask permission. A week later, word came from town that a drifter had been hanging around the post road, asking questions about a woman with 3 children. The cookhouse boy told me first, then I heard it from Caldwell himself. The drifter claimed to be a husband looking for his family. I felt a cold settle deep in my chest. That evening, I rode straight for the east cabin. Claire was outside, gathering laundry from the line. She looked up when she saw my face and went still. "What's happened?" she asked. "Someone's been asking around," I said. "Says he's looking for you." The color drained from her cheeks, but she didn't move. "Did he give a name?" "No. Just said he lost his wife and children on the road west. Sounds like he's been following rumors for months." She took a step back, her hands gripping the laundry tight. "He's not my husband," she said, voice flat. "He's the man who bought me a train ticket and called it mercy. The man who thought hunger made him owed." I said nothing. The wind tugged at the sheets on the line, snapping them like ghosts. "He hurt you?" I asked quietly. "Not with fists," she said, "but he wanted obedience more than kindness. When I left, he said I'd crawl back. I'd rather die in a tent." I nodded, feeling the slow burn of anger rise. "Then you won't crawl anywhere. If he comes this way, he'll find a closed door and a shotgun behind it." Her eyes met mine, fierce and trembling. "You'd risk that for us?" "I already did the night I found you," I said. "One more storm won't change much." She looked down, then back at me. "You can't fight the whole world for me, Rowan." "Maybe not," I said, "but I can hold the line until the world learns to mind its manners." She turned away, wiping at her face like she was dusting off the memory. "He'll come," she said, "men like him always do. Then he'll find out the prairie's got longer arms than he does." We didn't speak much after that. She gathered the last of the laundry, and I stayed until the lamps burned low. When I finally rode off, the moon was high, and the cabin behind me looked small against the endless plain. But there was a light in the window, steady and bright, and I knew she left it burning on purpose. That light followed me all the way home, flickering in the corner of my mind. The next morning broke dry and hard, the kind of day when the sun feels personal. I spent it riding the north line, half my thoughts on cattle, half on the man asking questions. Trouble travels faster than mail in these parts, and I knew it wouldn't be long before he found Dusty Spur. By noon, I'd made up my mind to tell Caldwell everything. He was a man who measured twice before cutting once, but he'd never turned a blind eye to decency. When I laid out what Clara had told me, he listened without interrupting, hands folded over his knee. When I finished, he said, "Every man's got a past. Not every past deserves a future. If he shows, we'll hear him out before we send him off. But she's under your word, and your word counts." That settled, I left the main house with a weight on my shoulders that felt too familiar. I'd carried it before, for my mother, for others who couldn't fight their own battles. The road back to the cabin seemed longer that day. The air buzzed with grasshoppers. The ground cracked where the last rain had dried. When I reached the cabin, the children were chasing each other around the garden, laughter cutting through the heat. Clara stood by the fence, her eyes scanning the horizon. She looked calm, but there was a tightness in her jaw that hadn't been there before. "He'll come from the east," she said, before I even dismounted. "That's where the road bends to the station." "You've thought about this," I said. "I've had time to think about too many things." She turned to me, and for a moment, the hard light softened. "I won't run again, Rowan. Not from him. Not from this." "You won't have to," I said. "You got the whole ranch between him and whatever he thinks he owns." We went about the chores like nothing had changed, but every sound felt sharper. The squeak of the water pump, the creak of the gate, the rustle of the wind through the cottonwoods. That's how fear works out here. It makes the world too clear. By evening, the heat broke into wind. I was sitting on the porch, oiling my rifle, when I saw dust rising on the horizon, one rider moving steady. Clara saw it too. She stood beside me, her hands gripping the porch rail. "That's him," she whispered. The rider came slow, as if testing the ground. When he drew close enough, I saw a thin man, hat pulled low, clothes city-made but travel-worn. His face had the pallor of someone who lived more indoors than out. He stopped at the gate, eyes fixed on Clara. "Clara Jennings," he called. "You've made me chase you clear across 3 territories." She didn't answer. I stood and stepped forward, the rifle still resting easy in my hand. "This your business, mister?" I said. He looked me over. Disdain quick in his eyes. "You her keeper?" "Her friend," I said, "and you're standing on Dusty Spur land. Best you state your reason for being here before you find it short-lived." He smirked. "You think you can scare me with a badge that ain't pinned?" "I don't need a badge," I said, "just a reason." He shifted in the saddle, jaw tightening. "She's my wife. Took my money, my name, and ran. I've got every right to take her back." I glanced at Clara. She stood tall, eyes steady. "Tell him," I said. "I was never his wife," she said, voice clear as the bell at dawn. "He offered a ticket west and said I owed him for it. When I refused to be what he wanted, he called it theft." The man spat into the dust. "You always did twist words, Clara. You think these folks will believe you? A widow, with no paper, no proof?" "I don't need paper," she said. "I've got witnesses now." He turned his glare on me. "You plan to stand between a man and his property?" "I plan to stand between a man and a lie," I said. "You've said your piece, now ride on." He laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "You think you're the first hero to draw on me? I'll have the law here inside a week." "You bring them," I said, "but you bring them with truth, not the story you sell in the saloon." He sneered. "You'll regret crossing me, cowboy." "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight." He looked like he wanted to spit another word, but something in the way I held that rifle changed his mind. He yanked the reins, turned the horse hard, and rode off toward the ridge. The dust swallowed him quick. When he was gone, the silence hit heavy. Clara exhaled, shaken, though she tried to hide it. I set the rifle aside. "He'll talk," I said. "Men like that always do, but he won't find ears here." She nodded, then sat on the porch step burying her face in her hands. The children peeked from the window, eyes wide. I knelt beside her. "It's over for now," I said. "He won't try again tonight." Her voice came muffled. "You shouldn't have stood for me, Rowan. He'll bring trouble. He always does." "I've been on first-name terms with trouble most of my life," I said. "It don't scare me none." She lifted her head, eyes red but steady. "You could have let me handle it." "You already did," I said. "You told him the truth. I just made sure he heard it." For a long while we sat in the quiet, listening to the wind pull at the laundry line. Then she said, "You ever get tired of being the good man?" "All the time," I said. "But it's the only kind I know how to be." That night, I slept outside on the porch, rifle across my lap. The stars were sharp again, and the moon painted the land silver. I thought about that man's face, about the kind of anger that eats itself raw. There's no law out here strong enough to save people from what pride turns them into. Sometime past midnight, Claire opened the door. She stood in the lamplight, her hair loose, a shawl over her shoulders. "Come inside," she said softly. "You've done enough standing watch." I shook my head. "Not yet. The wind's restless." She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "Then I'll leave the lamp burning." She went back in, and the door clicked shut. The light glowed through the cracks, a warm, steady heartbeat in the dark. Boone shifted beside the fence, snorted once, then settled. I leaned back in the chair and let the night hum around me. Somewhere out there, that man was plotting his next move, but for now, the cabin was still, the children safe, and Claire sleeping under the roof I promised her. I figured I could live with that kind of peace, even if it only lasted till dawn. Dawn found me still on the porch, boots wet with dew, eyes stinging from a night that refused to end. The horizon was pale, the kind of color that only comes before the sun burns it clean. I rose stiffly, stretched my back, and checked the rifle. The air smelled of sage and something uneasy. Boone pawed the ground, ears twitching to a sound I couldn't yet name. Claire opened the door, her hair unbraided, shawl pulled tight. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I did," I lied, "just not all at once." She glanced past me toward the open plain. "Do you think he's gone?" "No," I said. "I think he's thinking. And thinking men are the hardest kind to predict." The children stirred inside, small voices blending with the sound of the fire she started. The smell of coffee drifted through the doorway, rich and bitter. She handed me a cup without a word. I took it, feeling the heat steady my hands. "We can't live scared," I said finally. "If he rides back, we'll deal with him proper. Until then, we keep living." Clara nodded, but the tremor in her fingers betrayed her calm. "I hate that he still owns part of my peace," she said, "even now, after all this time." "That's what cowards do," I said. "They leave their ghosts behind to do their haunting." She looked at me then, eyes steady again. "And what do men like you leave behind?" "Footprints," I said, "if I'm lucky, the kind that point the right way." The morning went on like any other. I checked the fences, watered Boone, helped Samuel fix the latch on the gate. By noon, the wind had shifted south, dry and hot, carrying dust that stung the eyes. The air held that stillness that only happens before something breaks. Just after sundown, a rider came hard from the west. I saw him before he reached the cabin, Caldwell's hand Pete Hawkins, waving his hat. I stepped out to meet him. His horse was lathered, sides heaving. "Rowan," he called, "you best hear this quick." I led him to the porch. "Talk." "The man you warned about," he said, breathless. "He showed up at the saloon in town. Said you're harboring a thief. Claimed he's got papers saying the woman's his wife." "Papers don't make truth," I said, "only ink." Pete nodded. "Caldwell sent me to tell you the sheriff might ride out. He don't take kindly to domestic disputes, but he's the kind that listens too long to the loudest voice." "Then we'll have our say ready," I said. Pete looked uneasy. "You sure this is worth it? Folks'll talk. You're risking your place here." "Some things are worth the risk," I said. "This is one." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Tate, Caldwell stands behind you." He said, "A man's word is only as strong as the roof he builds for it. Guess you're building yours now." When he rode off, the twilight had turned the sky to copper. Clara had heard enough from the porch to know. She stood there, hands clenched at her sides. "He won't stop," she said quietly. "Not till he's made me small again." I stepped closer. "Then we make him see how big you've become." That night, after the children were asleep, we talked long by the fire. She told me about her life before, the small Missouri town, the drought that starved her family out, the offer that seemed like a salvation. "He said he was a merchant, Mama," she whispered. "Said he needed a wife to keep books and tend home, but all he wanted was obedience. When I asked to send a letter to my father, he said a woman's past was none of the world's concern. I left the night he locked the door from the outside." Her voice trembled, but her back stayed straight. "I took the children and ran before dawn. We slept in barns and ditches. When the tent tore, I thought that was the end of us. Then you came." I didn't say anything for a while. The fire cracked, the sound small but steady. "You did the hardest part yourself," I said finally. "I just showed up with a horse and some bad timing." She looked at me, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Don't you dare belittle what you did. You gave me more than shelter. You made me believe good men weren't ghosts." Her words hit harder than I expected. "I ain't sure I'm one of the good ones," I said. "You are," she said simply. "You just don't know how to forgive yourself yet." That silence between us grew heavy, not from fear this time, but from understanding. I wanted to reach for her hand, but something in me still thought I hadn't earned it. Instead, I said, "Tomorrow, I'll ride into town, talk to the sheriff before that man poisons the well. If he's got papers, we'll see them in the daylight." "You don't have to face him alone," she said. "I know," I said, "but if this goes bad, I'd rather the danger come for me first." The next morning, I saddled Boone before dawn. Clara stood in the doorway, the hem of her dress brushing the dirt. The sky behind her was streaked with pink, and the smell of coffee drifted out. "Be careful," she said. "He lies easily." "So do I said. "No, but only when it's useful." That earned a small smile from her. "I'll keep the door barred." "Good, and keep the lamp burning. A man rides straighter when he knows what he's riding back to." I rode hard for town. The road wound between low hills, the grass still bent from the storm weeks before. When I reached the sheriff's office, the air inside was thick with smoke and stale whiskey. Sheriff Daniels was behind his desk, boots up, hat tipped back. "Morning, Tate," he said without looking up. "I hear you got yourself tangled in a woman's quarrel." More like she got tangled in a man's lie, I said. He eyed me, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded paper. This here's what the fella showed me. Marriage license, Missouri, signed by Reverend Crenshaw. Looks proper enough. Mind if I see, I said. He passed it over. I studied it. The ink looked too clean for travel, the edges too crisp. You believe this? I believe what I can prove now, he said, and that paper's proof, till someone shows me better. I folded it slow. I'll bring you better, I said, but don't you make a woman stand trial for running from a man who locked her up like stock. Daniel sighed. You always had a way of making trouble sound like virtue. Look, Tate, I ain't keen on meddling in family matters. You keep things quiet. Maybe it all blows over. That's the thing about storms. Sheriff, I said, they don't blow over. They just circle back till you face 'em. I left him there with his boots on the desk and his conscience dozing. Outside, the sun was high and the street shimmered like glass. Across the road, the man himself leaned against the hitching post, hat low, a grin cutting through his face like a bad scar. Morning, hero, he said. You and I got business. Then talk, I said. He took a step closer, his voice low and mean. You think you can play protector? I'll have the law on my side before the week's out. You'll lose your place, your name, and that cabin of yours. Then we'll see where your charity gets you. I met his eyes. You're welcome to try, I said, but remember, laws out here are made by the men who ride for 'em, and I ride harder than you breathe. He sneered but said nothing. I mounted Boone and rode out, the heat pressing down like judgment. As I left town, I caught my reflection in the blacksmith's window, dusty, tired, but alive. And for the first time in years, I realized I was fighting for something that wasn't just survival. It was belonging. By the time I reached the cabin, the sky had turned to bronze, and the wind was picking up again. Clara met me at the gate, eyes searching my face. Well, she asked. Nothing settled, I said, but nothing lost. She exhaled. Then we keep breathing. Yeah, I said, dismounting. We keep breathing. The sun dipped behind the hills, setting the world on fire one more time before night took it, and for a little while at least, the wind carried peace instead of threat. The wind turned colder the next few days, dry and restless, scraping through the grass like a whisper you couldn't quite make out. Clouds gathered on the horizon again, the kind that promised a storm, not in the sky this time, but on the ground. The talk around town had begun to shift. Folks were curious, some sympathetic, some suspicious. A story half told travels faster than truth. I kept to the work. A man's hands can't lie when they're busy. But every hammer strike, every creak of saddle leather carried that itch of something coming. Boone felt it too. He tossed his head, pawed the dirt like he could smell wrongness in the air. On the third evening, Caldwell rode out to meet me by the south pasture. He was a quiet man, older than most of the hills we worked under, and he spoke slow because every word cost him something. Heard the sheriff's been asking questions again, he said, tightening his reins. He has, I said, and I gave him answers. Might not have been the ones he wanted. Caldwell studied me, the wind tugging at his hat brim. I've known you 10 years, Tate. You don't spook easy, but you're carrying a storm on your back. It ain't mine, I said, just keeping it from landing on the wrong folks. He nodded. Then you'll do it clean. If the sheriff comes, we'll stand behind the truth. This ranch was built on men's word, not their rumors." "Appreciate that," I said. He turned his horse, but before he left, he looked back. "Be careful what you protect, son. Some things we guard so close, we end up caging ourselves with them." That night, I couldn't shake his words. The cabin's lamplight glowed steady when I came over the rise. The smell of stew drifted on the wind. Inside, Clara was reading aloud to the children, her voice calm and even. I stood outside the window a moment, listening. She didn't see me, and I didn't want her to. There was something sacred in watching Pete's that doesn't know it's being watched. When I stepped inside, Samuel grinned wide. "Mama says you're the reason the roof doesn't leak." "Then she's giving me too much credit," I said. "It's her keeping it warm that counts." Clara looked up, eyes catching mine over the book. "You eat yet?" "Not properly," I said, but I could be persuaded. The stew was simple: beans, onions, a bit of salt pork, but it tasted like victory. Afterward, I helped Samuel with his carving, showing him how to smooth the wood with a piece of sandstone. Clara mended a tear in Emma's dress, humming that soft tune again. For a while, the world felt small and kind. When the children finally went to bed, Clara stayed by the fire. "The sheriff came today," she said. "He asked for me." I stopped mid-motion, the knife still in my hand. "He come to the cabin?" She nodded. "Said he just wanted to talk. I told him I wasn't his concern. He said law makes everyone his concern." "What else did he say?" "That the man showed him papers again. Said he'd take it to court if he had to. Asked if I'd be willing to testify." "And?" I told him the truth. But truth don't sound the same when someone else is holding the pen. I leaned back in the chair, the firelight flickering across the walls. "He's trying to wear you down," I said. "Men like him don't need to win. They just need you tired enough to stop fighting." Clara looked at me, eyes shadowed but fierce. "Then he'll find me stubborn." "You've already proved that." She smiled faintly. "You ever think the West is just one long test of who's more stubborn, the land or the people?" "Every damn day," I said, "and the land always wins." She poked the fire, watching sparks leap and fade. Then I guess we learned to burn slow. Outside, the wind was picking up again. The door rattled once, and she looked toward it. "You think he'll come here?" "I think if he does, he won't find what he's looking for." She turned to me, voice low. "And what's that?" "Fear," I said, "and that's what men like him feed on. We starve him of it. He'll ride on soon enough." I stayed that night again, sleeping light on the porch. The sky turned restless, clouds crawling over the moon. Just before dawn, Boone's whinny jolted me awake. I rose, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the dark. A shadow moved along the fence line, slow and deliberate. "Show yourself," I called. No answer, just the wind. Then another movement, this time closer. I fired a warning shot into the air. The echo rolled across the plain. The figure froze, then bolted toward the ridge. I gave chase a few steps before stopping. No point in shooting a coward in the back. When daylight came, I found boot prints by the fence, one set only. He'd been watching. Clara came out with her shawl tied around her shoulders. "Was it him?" "Could have been," I said, "or the wind playing tricks." "The wind doesn't wear boots," she said quietly. I met her eyes. "Then it was him, but he's still running." She nodded once, then looked toward the ridge. "Let him run." That afternoon, I rode back to the main house. Caldwell listened without interrupting. "You keep that rifle close," he said finally. "If the sheriff won't protect you, the land will. Men like that always break themselves on it." When I returned, the cabin felt smaller, safer somehow, like the danger had pulled the walls in tight. Clara was baking bread again, the smell thick and sweet. The children were drawing pictures in the dirt, houses, horses, a sun with too many rays. "Look," Emma said, holding up her drawing. "That's you, Mr. Tate." I laughed. "You made me taller than Boone, because you are," she said simply. Clara looked up from her kneading, a soft smile playing at her lips. "Out of the mouths of babes," she said. For a while, the laughter filled every corner, but even in laughter, I could feel the air tightening, waiting. The prairie teaches you that peace is never a promise, just a pause. That night, after the bread cooled, I sat outside again. Clara joined me, a lantern in her hand. The wind had calmed, and the stars had come back out, bright and endless. "I keep thinking about what you said," she murmured, "about fear. And I think it's not just him we're starving," she said. "It's the past." "Then let it starve," I said. She set the lantern down and leaned on the railing beside me. "You ever think about leaving all this behind? The ranch, the dust, the fences?" "Sometimes," I said, "but then I remember. Every place has its dust. This one just shows it on us." She laughed softly. "You sound like a preacher again." "Maybe, or maybe just a man who finally stopped running from the wind." For a long while, we sat there, listening to the quiet, the kind that only comes when the land is holding its breath. And for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't just guarding someone else's peace. I was finding my own. The next few days carried that strange calm that comes before a reckoning. The sky was too blue, the air too still. Even the coyotes kept quiet at night. Folks at the ranch worked like nothing was coming, but everyone felt it. You could see it in the way they looked east when the sun went down, as if waiting for a dust cloud that hadn't risen yet. I rode the perimeter every morning, checking for tracks, found a few. Boot prints mostly, some horse sign near the creek bed, but nothing clear enough to follow. Still, it was enough to keep me uneasy. Boone sensed it too. His ears flicked at shadows that weren't there. The prairie has its own kind of language, and I'd learned to listen. By the third night, even the wind had gone quiet. Clara was sitting on the porch, a lantern at her feet, sewing by the dim light. The children were asleep, the cabin breathing slow and steady behind her. I walked up and leaned against the post. "You should rest," I said. She looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. "You say that like rest is something you can just pick up off a shelf." "Sometimes it is," I said. "Just gotta stop reaching for everything else first." She smiled faintly. "I'll rest when I stop waiting for footsteps in the dark." I wanted to tell her I'd stand watch as long as she needed, but I knew better than to promise safety in a world that didn't offer it. So I just said, "You ain't alone in the waiting." She nodded, and the silence between us said the rest. Sometime after midnight, Boone started snorting again. I stepped outside with the rifle. The moon was thin, half a ghost in the sky. Then I saw it, a faint glow from the ridge, moving slow. A lantern, maybe. My stomach turned cold. I went back in, quiet but quick. Clara was already awake, standing by the window. "You saw it too," she said, Stay with the children, I told her. Keep the door locked. If I'm not back before dawn, ride west to Caldwell's. I'm not hiding again, she said, and this ain't hiding. It's surviving. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. I stepped out, boots silent in the dust, rifle low but ready. The glow disappeared once, then flickered again higher up the ridge. Whoever it was, they wanted to be seen. That was the kind of message cowards send when they're trying to scare more than shoot. I followed the trail halfway up before I found him. He was sitting on a rock, hat low, a lantern at his feet, like a man waiting for confession. The drifter. He turned his head when he heard my steps. I knew you'd come, he said. Guess you were right, I answered, though you might not like what comes with me. He smiled thinly. You think this ends with a gun? I think it ends with truth, I said. How that happens is up to you. He picked up the lantern and tilted it, letting the light spill across his face. He looked smaller than before, the kind of small that happens when pride starts to crack. You think she told you everything, Noiche? He said. I heard enough. Then you know she's a liar, he spat. You know she left a man who offered her the world. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low. The world you offered had bars on the windows. He laughed, a harsh, empty sound. She told you I locked her up. I kept her safe. The world eats women like her alive. Maybe, I said, but it's her choice, whether she gets eaten or not. He stood, the lantern swinging in his hand. You don't get it, cowboy. Men like us, we make order out of chaos. You take that away. You get dust and ruin. I built her a life. You built her a cage, I said. The air between us felt tight enough to break. He dropped the lantern suddenly, and the glass shattered, flames licking at the dry grass. I raised the rifle. Don't, I said. He froze, eyes glinting in the firelight. You'd shoot a man for her. I'd shoot a man for less, I said. The fire caught fast, racing through the brush. The smell of smoke filled the night, hot and sharp. He glanced at it, then back at me. You'd let this place burn before letting her go? I'd rebuild it from ash if it meant she never had to see your face again. He looked at me for a long second, then spat in the dirt. You think you've won, Tate? She'll always belong to someone. Women like her always do. Then I hope it's herself this time, I said. He turned to leave, but not before tossing something into the flames, a folded paper that curled black before I could grab it. That was the proof, he said over his shoulder. Guess now it's her word against mine. He mounted his horse and rode east, the sound fading fast. I stamped out what was left of the fire, but the smell of smoke clung to me. When I came back down the ridge, Clara was waiting at the gate, shawl pulled tight, eyes searching the dark. It's done, I said. He's gone. Gone where? Doesn't matter, he won't be back. She stared at me, reading the truth behind the words. You didn't? No, I said, but I thought about it. She nodded slow. Then, that makes two of us. The night stayed quiet after that. I sat on the porch again till dawn, the rifle across my lap, the weight of what almost happened pressing heavy. When morning came, Clara brought coffee and sat beside me. The light caught her hair, gold against the pale sky. Thank you, she said. Yeah, for what? For not being the man I thought you might have to be. I took a slow breath. If I ever become him, promise me you'll stop me before I notice. I would, she said, but I don't think I'll ever have to. We sat there in silence while the sun came up over the plains. The world looked the same, but it felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe I was. By noon, word came from town that the drifter had boarded a stage east. The sheriff didn't ask questions, Caldwell didn't push, and nobody else cared to stir the dust. Out here, trouble only stays where it's welcome. That evening, Claire took down the torn curtains, washed them, and hung new ones she'd sewn herself. The cabin looked brighter for it. You could have left, I said, watching her work. So could you, she said. We both smiled at that, small but sure. The prairie stretched out in every direction, endless and unchanging. But for the first time since that night in the storm, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like a promise, quiet, patient, waiting for what came next. Autumn crept in quiet, trading the hard light of summer for a softer gold. The grass turned brittle, the mornings came colder, and the smell of rain gave way to wood smoke. I felt life at Dusty Spur slipped back into its old rhythm, though nothing truly went back to the way it was. Some things once bent, never straighten again, but sometimes that's what makes them strong. Clara worked steady at the cookhouse now, mending linens, keeping books when Caldwell's wife was away. She walked to town on Sundays with Emma, head high, no longer looking over her shoulder. The children grew like spring weeds. Samuel could saddle Boone by himself, and Grace had a laugh that could pull the weariness off a man's bones. The cabin was theirs outright. Caldwell had said as much one evening over supper. Seems to me a roof belongs to the ones who keep it standing. He'd told me. Clara's eyes had shone, but she'd said nothing. Gratitude, with her, was never loud. As for me, I found myself lingering longer at the cabin each night, the workday stretching into conversation, the hours unspooling slow as syrup. We didn't talk about what had passed. Some things are too raw for words, and silence can hold truth better than speech. But sometimes she'd hum while mending, and I'd catch myself looking up just to listen, knowing that sound meant the house was whole. One evening after the first frost, I rode up to find the windows glowing, smoke curling from the chimney like a signal of peace. When I stepped inside, Claire was pulling bread from the oven. The children were already asleep, their small breaths soft as the wind through dry grass. She set the loaf on the table, wiped her hands, and turned to me. "You look tired," she said. "Fenced by the south pastures, giving up on life," I said. "Might be time to tear it down and start new." She nodded, her eyes on the bread cooling between us. Funny how things last longer when they're mended slow. I smiled. "You talking about fences or folks?" "Maybe both," she said. "You planning on eating or just standing there thinking about it?" I sat breaking the loaf. The smell filled the room, rich and comforting. I hadn't realized how hungry I was till that first bite. "You ever think about moving back east?" I asked. She looked up surprised. "East has nothing for me but ghosts." "Ghosts can be quiet," I said. She shook her head. "They're quieter here." The lamplight softened her face, and for a moment, the years of fear and running seemed far away. She poured coffee into my cup, sat across from me, and folded her hands. "You saved us," she said softly. "I offered a place," I said. "You did the saving." "Don't argue with a woman who's fed you," she said, and there was a trace of humor in it now, the kind that had been missing for too long. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing a scatter of dry leaves across the porch. "You ever wonder why I stopped that night?" I asked. "I could have ridden past. Most men would have." "I've wondered," she said. "You could have." "I'd like to tell you it was because I'm a good man," I said. Truth is, I saw that tent, and something in me broke. I remembered my mother, her face in the storm, and I thought maybe if I could help you, I could fix something in me I never got to fix for her. Clara's gaze softened, the firelight catching in her eyes. "Then I'm sorry for her," she said, "but I'm grateful for what her memory gave us." The room fell quiet after that, the kind of quiet that holds both sorrow and peace. She stood and walked to the window, looking out into the dark. "You think he's really gone?" she asked after a while. "I think he's chasing something that isn't here anymore," I said. "Men like him don't know what to do when there's nothing left to own." She turned back, her face calm. "Then maybe we can finally live like we belong." "That sounds about right," I said. Weeks turned into months, and the snow came early that year. The ranch slowed to a crawl, cattle penned close, men taking shelter when the wind howled. I spent the coldest nights at the cabin, claiming it was closer to the pasture, though everyone knew the truth. Clara didn't question it, and neither did I. We just fell into a rhythm that didn't need explaining. One night, the blizzard hit harder than any before. The wind screamed through the cracks. The fire fought to stay alive. Emma and Samuel huddled near the hearth while Clara fed the flame. I checked the shutters, making sure the nails held. When I turned, she was watching me. "This feels familiar," she said. "It's different," I told her. "Last time, the storm found you. This time, it's just passing through." She smiled faintly. "You always did know how to find the right words." I shrugged. "Only after I've run out of wrong ones." When the wind eased, the world outside was white and clean, the kind of quiet that only comes after chaos. I stood by the window, watching the snow settle. Clara came to stand beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "Tomorrow," I said, "and the day after." She shook her head. "I mean after all this, when the children are grown, when the ranch is just another story." I thought about that, the weight of years I hadn't yet lived pressing down. "I reckon I'll still be here, Wickhammer," I said, "somewhere on this land. Maybe patching fences, maybe talking to a horse that don't listen." "And me?" she asked. I looked at her then, really looked. The woman who'd once faced a storm with a gun in her hand and fear in her eyes, now standing steady, unshaken. "You'll be wherever peace finally stays," I said. "And if I've got any sense, I'll be near enough to hear you hum." She smiled, slow and real. "Then I'll keep humming." The fire popped, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. I reached for her hand, rough and warm in mine. She didn't pull away. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering every scar the land had carried. That night, as the storm settled into silence, I realized the truth I'd been circling for months. I hadn't saved her. We'd saved each other. Out here, that's the only kind of redemption that lasts. When dawn came, the world was silver and the air smelled clean again. I stepped outside, boots sinking into fresh snow, and looked at the cabin behind me, the smoke rising, the laughter of children spilling faint through the door. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The years have a way of softening memory, like river stones rounded by time, but some nights still come back sharp. The sound of rain on canvas, the crack of thunder, the sight of a woman standing in the storm holding on to everything she had left that never fades. I'm older now, slower in the joints, gray in the beard, but I still ride the line some mornings if only to hear the land breathe. Dusty Spurs smaller these days. Caldwell's passed on. His sons run the herds in the cabin by the East Ridge. Well, it's more than a shelter now. It's home. Clara still keeps it, though she laughs when I say that. You make it sound like I own the whole of Wyoming, she says. You do, I tell her, at least the piece I stand on. Emma's gone and married a school teacher over in Rawlins. Samuel runs horses for the U.S. Cavalry, rides like he was born in the saddle. Little Grace isn't little anymore. She teaches Sunday lessons in town, still hums the same tune her mother used to sing on storm nights. I reckon I've had a good life for a man who never set out to find one. Sometimes, after supper, when the light's gone soft and the fire's got that low hum, Clara sits by the window, sewing by habit more than need. I sit across from her, boots off, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. We don't talk much anymore. We don't have to. After all these years, silence between us is just another way of speaking. One evening, she looked up from her sewing and said, "Do you remember that first night?" "I remember every sound of it," I said. "The wind tearing at the tent, the thunder rolling, your eyes behind that revolver." She smiled. "You look scared." "I was," I said. "A woman pointing a gun tends to do that." She shook her head. "Not scared of the gun, scared for me." I nodded. "Yeah, guess I was. Guess I still am sometimes." The fire cracked. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves. "You ever wish things had gone different?" she asked. "No," I said, "not once. Every wrong turn led right here." She set the sewing aside and leaned back, eyes on the flames. "I used to dream about a house with real walls, a door that shut out the wind. I never thought I'd find it at the end of a dirt road with a man too stubborn to stop fixing fences." "Stubborn's kept this roof up," I said. She laughed softly, the sound, like the past, sighing through her. "You ever wonder how it all would have gone if you'd ridden past that night?" "I did," I said, "for years, but now I think about it the other way. What would have happened if you hadn't taken my hand?" Her eyes found mine, steady and warm. "You'd have kept riding, Rowan. You'd have found another storm." "Maybe," I said, "but none worth weathering like that one." We sat quiet for a while. The fire burned low. The smell of cedar thickened the room. I thought about all the storms since then, the ones outside and the ones inside us. Some we faced together, some we just outlasted. She rose and walked to the door, opening it a crack. The night air came in cool and sweet. The stars were out, endless and clear. She looked back at me and said, "You remember what you told me that night?" "I've said a lot of foolish things. You'll have to remind me." "You said tonight you'll sleep under a roof." I smiled. "I remember. You didn't believe me." "No," she said, "but I do now." I got up, walked to her side. The prairie spread out in front of us, black and silver, the same and not the same. Somewhere out there, coyotes called, and the echo rolled across the hills. I put my arm around her shoulders, felt her lean against me just enough to know she was there. "You ever think the past still watches us?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "But I think it's smiling tonight." She closed the door, and we stood there in the quiet, two shadows folded into one. Later, when the fire had died to embers and the house was still, I lay awake listening to the wind. It wasn't angry anymore. It moved through the cracks gentle, like an old friend who'd finally learned to whisper instead of howl. Maybe that's what healing is. Not forgetting the storm, but learning to sleep while it rains. In the morning, I rose before the sun, as I always do. The sky was pink over the ridge, the air cold enough to bite. I saddled Boone's son, a big chestnut, with the same stubborn heart, and rode out to check the line. The world felt familiar under me, solid and forgiving. When I looked back, the cabin was a small dot of smoke against the horizon. I thought of that night, all those years ago, of the woman in the storm, the children clutching her skirts, the promise I'd made without knowing what it meant. "You'll sleep under a roof," I'd said, and she had. But so had I for the first time in a long while. The wind shifted then, carrying the smell of cedar and bread, the faint hum of a tune I knew by heart. I tipped my hat to the morning and rode on. Some debts, it turns out, are paid not with coin or thanks, but with the life that follows. And in that life, every sunrise feels like forgiveness.